The 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had ordered them. When they all saw him, they worshipped, but they doubted. Then Jesus approached and said to them, "All power in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always until the end of the age." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
As I said, it's always a great blessing to have somebody who's in priestly formation to join us for Mass. You know, there's a lot of people think that there is a vocations crisis in the church, and there is indeed a crisis of vocations, as in people who are answering the call to the priesthood or to the religious life. It's not that God is not calling people to the priesthood and religious life. It's that so many people who have a vocation, they are not able to hear, or they don't have the faith strong enough to answer the call. Vocations have to be fostered. Right? Most of us who join the priesthood or go to the seminary, we didn't grow up thinking, oh man, it's going to be so great to not have a wife and not have kids and not have any money, right? It'd be strange to think that. Right? If somebody told me that they always wanted to be a priest, I'd probably second guess, right, whether or not they should consider the priesthood. Right? Vocations have to be fostered. Right? And it's a beautiful thing here at St. Bernard that we've had a number of young men who have been answering the call. Many of you are aware that in the last 5 years, we've had 4 people enter into priestly formation. Most of them being Wabash students, right? There's no reason why we can't have other people from our parish answer the call as well. Right? So always need to be praying for vocations and also praying for those who are in the seminary. A seminary is not where you go and it's a done deal. It is a continued discernment. When people discern out of the seminary, it's not like they fail or something like that. Right? It's a discernment process. You think you might have a call to the priesthood, and so you go to the seminary, you enter into formation to continue to discern that call. And it is a beautiful life. Right? I went to the seminary over 15 years ago, right? And I can tell you that I'm far more blessed than I ever could have imagined. I had no idea how beautiful priestly life could be. Right? And so continue to pray for all of our young people that they might have the courage to answer the call of the priesthood or to be a religious sister. Even though it may seem like God is not calling as many people, he still is. We just need to pray for them to be able to have the courage to answer the call. Right? Today is also the feast of the Most Holy Trinity. Right? I know this is probably the solemnity that all of you guys look forward to the most, right? Year after year, you can't wait to hear this great theological explication, right? The doctrine of the Trinity. I have to confess that when I was in seminary, I kind of struggled with the Trinity as well. When I was in theology, I had to spend a whole semester on the Trinity. And I'll be honest with you, it was interesting for about the first class or two. And the rest of it was, it seemed so abstract. And so I've always kind of struggled with the Trinity and preaching about Holy Trinity Sunday. But I have to say that this morning I'm very excited to speak about the Trinity. Because I think it's very fascinating and very interesting that we believe that God is a Trinity. Think about what that means. That means that God does not exist as a solitary being, but rather from all eternity, God has existed in a relationship of persons. In some ways, you might say that God is a family from all eternity, existing in relationship. And the reason why I think that is so interesting is because for about the last 5 or 6 years, I've had kind of this side passion, this side hobby of mine. I went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land about 6 years ago, and the professor who was leading the pilgrimage, he was talking to me about this scientific institution called the Discovery Institute. The Discovery Institute. Just by curiosity, anybody ever heard of the Discovery Institute? I didn't think so. Right? It's very interesting. You should go home and look it up today, right, if you're interested in this sort of thing. But the reason why it's so fascinating is because he basically started me on a journey over the last 5 or 6 years where I am constantly amazed at how much science teaches us about God. You know, I went through public schools. I went through school all through elementary, high school, college, and I just kind of had this idea that science was just separate, right, from religion or from our ideas about God. And I was so surprised to learn just how much science actually teaches us about God. Now, I'll give you some examples. Right? There's a man named Dr. James Tour. Right? He's basically the leading scientist in something called nanotechnology. How many of you heard of nanotechnology? Right? Yeah, so it's a super fascinating, interesting branch of science. Right? He's like the leading scientist. And he's become very famous over the last few years because he's caught a lot of flack for basically questioning evolution. And he's not questioning it because of faith or anything like that. He's questioning it because the leading scientists in that area are beginning to question everything we thought we knew about Darwinistic evolution. Like, for example, when Charles Darwin, when he began to find fossil evidence, right, that species have certain adaptations, Darwin 150 years ago, he assumed that the more we search for fossils, the more we're going to find that we have all this fossil evidence of species changing. You know, there's a difference between a species changing and adapting. And adapting is when, a bird might change the size of its beak, right, to help it catch food better. That's different than a bird becoming a dog. It's a totally different change. And it just so happens that the more that we dig for fossils, the more that we realize there just isn't any evidence anywhere of species changing. Not only that, but the more that we've learned about DNA, the more we realize how immensely complicated DNA is. And that in order for a species to change, it has to change its DNA. And how practically impossible that would be. Think about, if you go home on your computer and you find a way to crack the code of your computer, you start randomly changing certain things in your computer code. Most likely the computer is going to stop working. It's going to die. That's basically the same thing that happens with DNA. There's all sorts of other things we've learned, and the point I'm getting at is that science is showing us the miracle of life, the miracle of consciousness itself. That despite all of our advancements in science and technology, we still can't show how the world went from being unalive to all of a sudden full of life. Scientists may be able to take things that are living already and make something else that is living. But we still don't know how something completely dead and lifeless has become alive. There's still so many things about our minds, our souls, our consciousness that science just can't even grasp. There was a movie that came out a couple months ago. It was about near-death experiences. Some of you may have seen this. It's becoming a branch of science in peer-reviewed journals. That people are amazed about these near-death experiences that people are able to have. People, for example, who have been blind from their birth. And they have a near-death experience in which they're able to describe every single thing in the hospital room, not only in the hospital, but even outside. Things that they saw, even though they've been blind from birth. That's part of the mystery of our soul, the mystery of our consciousness. Even the miracle of consciousness itself. We know that there are certain biological attributes that affect our mind and our consciousness, but it still doesn't explain away everything in our consciousness. The fact that we have a conscience. The fact that we're able to know abstract truths. It's amazing the more that scientists study our world and study human beings, just how many mysteries they continue to discover. And what does this have to do with the Trinity? Well, it has a lot to do with the Trinity. Because the Trinity also is very mysterious. And at first thought, it might make you think that it just seems like something abstract, or maybe even if somebody in a different religion, they might say it doesn't make any sense or it's irrational. But the more we learn about our minds, the more it points to the Trinity. Think about what your mind is, your soul. That in your mind, you are able to have 3 different kinds of mental processing, all that take place in the one solitary mind. You have the act of being conscious, the act of thinking. When you say that you're thinking about something, you're talking about yourself thinking. And there's an object in your mind that you're thinking about. That's 2 things. And then you have the consciousness that you're thinking about that object. That's the third thinking function in your mind. So you have one mind, but these three distinct functions that take place in your mind. It's just like the Trinity. The Trinity, everything takes place in one divine nature, one God, and yet there are three distinct persons. Just mind-blowing when you think about that. Or think about some of the other things that we have learned from science. Think about the fact that science over the last couple hundred years has proven that everything that we thought was stationary or solitary in the universe actually exists in a relationship. Have you ever thought about that? Like, think about this ambo here today that I'm standing at. You and I, we may look at this ambo and we think, yeah, it's just one piece of solid wood structure. But we all know that if we had eyes to see, if we had microscopes strong enough, we would see that this ambo is completely alive and in motion because of all the atoms and the electrons and the protons and the neutrons. It is moving, it is alive, it is a relationship. And we now know that from science. And that's just at a microscopic level. Even think about a macro level. Think about our universe. I know all of you have heard of Albert Einstein. What was his famous theory? The theory of relativity. That everything in the universe, even our planets, our stars, the sun, it is all relative depending on what it is relationship to. Everything exists in a relationship. Nothing is solitary. Everything exists in a relationship. And it's the exact same way with God. That from all eternity, He has been a relation of three persons. Just amazing. I think this stuff is incredible. I think it's so fascinating, so interesting. And maybe you guys think it's boring, and that's okay. You have to listen to me anyway. Right? I think it's so fascinating. The more we learn about our universe, we learn about how mysterious it is. How mysterious you and I are. It's beautiful. It's amazing. It's awe-inspiring. And it's so important that God does exist in this relationship. Why does it matter that God exists in a relationship? I'll tell you why it matters. It matters because I imagine that if you're anything like me, there's probably been times in your life where you thought to yourself, I don't even know if God cares about me. I don't even know if God is even listening. Does God even care about what I feel or what I'm going through? I'm sure all of us have gone through our lives and we've thought that before. The reason why the Trinity matters is because it shows that God from all eternity, He wasn't lonely. He wasn't alone. He didn't actually need anything. And yet He chose to create us anyway. And that's why His love for us is unconditional. Just as a husband and wife join together in marriage, they don't need children. They don't need something from their children. They have so much love, so much joy within them that they want to spread it to someone else. And because of that, they create a family. And that love is so strong and so unconditional, it's hardly even fathomable. And that's exactly what God's love is like for us, except for even stronger. Because you might be the most loving parent in the world, but you're still not perfect like God is. His love is even stronger. He doesn't need anything from us. He only wants to give everything to us because of His unconditional love. So from now on in this Feast of the Holy Trinity, it's not something that you look ahead to and think, we're going to get some boring homily. Right? It's so fascinating, so beautiful, that God is a relationship of persons, existing in perfect love from all eternity. And His only desire for us is that He can give us a share in that perfect love that He has experienced from all eternity.